Um, let's talk about investing, and let's also talk about speculation or speculating. Both words are used interchangeably, wrongly, in my opinion, and as a result of a lack of understanding of the difference between both processes, I feel that some errors of omission are made and errors of commission are made by a lot of people. Um, I like to start with definitions. I believe um, that if you do not start with a definition, you put yourself at risk of being misunderstood, but also you put yourself at risk of deceiving yourself. Um, we'll start with investing. And I'll define investing by defining what I call an investment operation. This definition comes from Benjamin Graham. Benjamin Graham, for those who understand and who've studied investing, recognize him to be the dean of investing. He's the same investor, worked as a hedge fund or fund manager back in the early 90s, 1900s. But also, he was the teacher of Warren Buffett. And he came up with a definition that I haven't found an equal to. He said an investment operation is one upon which, following thorough analysis, promises safety of your principal or safety of your capital and an adequate return or a satisfactory return. And let me say that again. An investment operation is one which promises, upon thorough analysis, safety of your capital and an adequate return. There are 3 steps that I want to address in that definition. Very critical, very fundamental to investing. Number 1, it's an operation, meaning it's an exercise. And that is not even one of the 3 that I want to define. You notice that I didn't say an investing is, I said an investment operation. The first part of that definition is thorough analysis. In other words, detailed analysis. A thorough analysis is one that is based on facts and that can be validated and verified, showing using figures. It's not something that is based on opinions. It's not something that is based on consensus. It's something that is based on evidence, factual evidence. And that simply means in order for you to be a good investor, one of the things you have to learn how to do is how to do detailed analysis. You spend time and look through numbers, both quantitatively and qualitatively, because investment is both a science and an art. I don't even like to use the reference science or art. I consider it to be a craft, a little bit like cooking. The science part of it is known, application. Unfortunately, it's not predictive. It's not like a natural law where if you do A, you will get B. And that's where the art part comes in. It simply means that you have to learn that there is some randomness in the whole process of investing. There is some luck, there is some skill, and your ability to adjust and adapt and tailor your approach to suit you, who is or who are, or those who are, people who are the investors. And that's what makes it a craft, not a science, not really an art, but a craft. It's a combination of both and the application to give you a desired outcome, somewhat different to everyone else's. That's the first thing we'll do. We'll define investment. Any definition that does not fall within what I just gave you should be considered speculative. Now, I gave you the first part of that definition. The second part of that definition is preservation of capital. So the first was thorough or detailed analysis. The second part of the definition is that you must always preserve capital. So any activity that you're engaging in where you're putting capital at risk to the point where you cannot guarantee or you do not have confidence that your capital or your principal is being protected. That experience, that occasion, that process, that activity is speculative. So, for an investor, the first and the most important thing you have to recognize is you have to preserve your capital. Very important. Now, number three is the process or the activity should guarantee some form of return that is adequate. And Benjamin was very careful about the choice of words. He used adequate return or satisfactory return. Now, he did not say a very high return or a high return. And the reason is simple. For some people, they are risk averse. For other people, they're happy to take more risks. And what Benjamin was trying to say was, if you've done your detailed analysis, and if you've found an activity or a process or an opportunity whereby your principal is guaranteed, then it's okay for you to accept a return that is satisfactory to your standards. And that might mean, you accept something below par simply because it protects your original investment. When you combine all three, you come up with a definition of investing. An investment operation is one of which, upon thorough analysis, promises safety of your capital or safety of your principal and guarantees or promises, that's the word. It doesn't have to guarantee, but it should promise an adequate or satisfactory return. Any operation that does not meet that definition is speculative. Now let's make it more practical. There are different asset classes. I will talk about those asset classes in a different session, but let me use an example to make this a little bit more understandable. If you're going to deploy or allocate capital to an investment opportunity or to an opportunity, the first question you ask yourself is, number one, is my capital protected? Number two, is the return satisfactory? Number three, is this within my circle of competence? In other words, can I do thorough analysis? Can I do a detailed analysis on this opportunity? If the answer to all three is yes, then the operation you're about to engage in is somewhat akin to investing. If the answer is no, then you're speculating. Now let me say something else so you can understand. Speculation or speculating is neither immoral or unethical. All you just have to know and be aware of is when you're speculating. The biggest mistake most people make is where they speculate full-time as opposed to part-time, or where they speculate with more money than they can afford to lose, or when they speculate with a short time horizon. They don't have enough time, but they're placing a bet on something that is uncertain. The key thing here is recognizing the difference between risk and uncertainty. Risk is a potential future event that can be measured quantitatively. Uncertainty, on the other hand, is risk or a future event that cannot be measured, even either quantitatively or qualitatively. Uncertainty, in many ways, has a closer relationship with speculation. Risk has a closer relationship with investing. So everything has some form of risk. There is a risk that as you cross the road, something could happen. There is a risk that you may not wake up tomorrow. But you can actually ask yourself the question, what are the odds? What is the probability? And that's where you separate risk and uncertainty. You can measure risk within reason, not completely, but there are certain risks in relation to investing that can be measured quantitatively. There are some qualitative risks that you cannot measure. And therefore, we put those under uncertainty. Give you a good example. You want to invest in a company. You've done your analysis and you've identified the intrinsic value of the company. what it's worth. You come up with a value of £10. Let's use that number to keep it simple. You decide that because you've done your calculation, because you've identified some risks, you recognize that you could have made errors in your calculation, in your analysis. And so you allow what's called a margin for error, a margin of safety, some redundancy in your analysis. You decide, I'm going to allow for 30% discount to my estimated intrinsic value. A 30% discount to £10 means you have to allow for £3. So you would say, I'm willing to pay for this asset at £7, allowing 30% for safety. I've estimated that the value is 10, but I'm going to pay 70. That's what I'm willing to pay. If for some reason you go into negotiation with the owner of the company, and the owner of the company says, unfortunately, I am not going to sell this company at anything less than £11. As a matter of fact, if you want it for 11, you can have it. You bargain with him, you go back and forth, and he decides, my minimum is £10.50. You've done your analysis. Your analysis is based on how much cash the business might generate or could generate, how much is generated in the past, how much it could generate in the future, the potential and the possibility of growth, growing the cash flow, increasing the possibility of maintaining what I call the competitive advantage, and in many ways reducing the discount rate. You do your analysis and you come up with £10. You're willing to pay 7 to give you some buffer. The owner says it has to be £10.50 or nothing. If for some reason you paid £10.50, then to just explain how speculation and investing have a close relationship, the question would be, have you made a mistake? Well, technically you haven't. Here's the point. £10 would have been investing because you've done your detailed analysis, you've done your thorough analysis, you've identified that your principal is safe, you've identified a return that is satisfactory. However, you're now about to pay what we'll call a premium. You're paying 50 pence, much more than you believe the value is. Now, that 50 pence, you might decide that you're willing to take that level of uncertainty with the hope that the business will grow. And if the business grows, or if the demand for the product you're making increases, then the value will move up. Because intrinsic value does not stay as a flat sum or figure. Intrinsic value can stay flat, it can go up, or it can go down. Now, if you paid £10.50, the £10 investment, or the £10 part of the £10.50 would have been an investing operation. The 50 pence extra you paid, you will call that speculative. And that simply means you're making that decision on hope. You're making that decision and hopefully things turn around. You couldn't justify it because you've overpaid for the asset. So speculation and investing, they have a very close relationship. I'll give you another example. You invest in gold. Gold has no intrinsic value. And the reason is simply because gold cannot generate cash flow. If you took all the gold in the world and you were to compress it together, make it into one unit, it could fit a room of a certain significant size. That gold will sit there and remain there. It does not have any ability to produce cash flow. And for that reason, we say gold has no intrinsic value. The value of gold is simply based on what you and I believe someone else might offer us for it in the future. So you're effectively relying on what we might call hope, or what we call in investing the fool's game, meaning you're hoping that a greater fool comes along and pays much more than you paid for it. On that basis, whenever you invest in something that does not produce cash flow, that is speculation. Because number one, Your principal is not guaranteed. The price of gold fluctuates based on the perception of uncertainty in the future. Fear, geopolitical issues, currency devaluation, but it's all in the future. And you can't quantify it, it's uncertain. So whenever you invest in gold, the principal is at risk. The return doesn't exist because gold does not produce any return. It's not an asset, it's what you would call a non-productive asset. It doesn't create any service, it doesn't create any products, and therefore there is no cash flow. As a matter of fact, there is cash flow out from you as opposed to towards you. Because if you have gold, you have to pay for storage and then you have to pay for insurance. So you're spending money to hold the asset. So it's a reverse return. Now, that doesn't mean that the value of gold does not go up. But the future is not here. Today is all you have. If you look back at the gold you've had for a long time, you can see that there's been no return. It has not produced any cash flow. Its value in the marketplace would have fluctuated. So the key thing to remember from this session is there's nothing wrong with speculating. There is a lot more to be gained from investing. If you want to choose the approach to adopt or to follow, my recommendation is choose investing, because in the long run, if you study history, as a matter of fact, if you looked at the Forbes 400 list, one of the things you find out very, very quickly is that of all the investors in the Forbes 400 list, there are only a handful of investors who are speculators. Those who have done really, really well, Warren Buffett, are investors. They're not speculators. So they do not buy non-productive assets. And they follow the definition of investing given by Benjamin Graham. Now, let me conclude by saying something. I just gave you a definition. I'm not saying that that is the only definition. I only gave you a definition that I consider to be consistent with my philosophy, my principles, and my attitude towards investing. You might find someone else who has a different definition. I'm happy with that. As a matter of fact, one thing I want you to take out from this session is question what you're learning, question what you're hearing. Choose the definition that works for you. But I will say this in conclusion. If you're going to speculate, let it be something you do on a part-time basis. Number two, let it be something you do with your eyes open. Ideally, designate a percentage of your portfolio, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, no more, ideally more than 5%, of your portfolio that you would dedicate towards speculation. And here is the point. Some of the great companies of today, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, started as speculative opportunities. So if someone came to you and pitched, if Bill Gates came to you, let's say back in the 80s, and pitched a company to you that he would call Microsoft. And although the company was created before then, but let's just use 1980 as an example, and pitched that he was starting a company called Microsoft, and he was going to revolutionize the computer industry, and that 30, 40 years from now, it would be the most valuable company in the world. Would you believe him? The first question you would have said would have been, he's too young. He's probably has no business or financial understanding, not savvy enough. He's deluded. He has no experience. He hasn't even finished his education. And therefore, whatever capital you would have been giving him would have been considered speculative. As a matter of fact, you would have been right, because you need to have a philosophy that is consistent with your values. However, if you chose not to provide capital to him as of today, you would regret it. And that's the reason why I said a percentage of your investments should be considered speculative. Now, that does not mean that Microsoft was completely speculative. It simply means that it was uncertain. Its future was uncertain. However, quantitatively, you would have been able to identify what the potential intrinsic value could be under different scenarios, which would mean you would have been able to calculate the risk. You would have tried to understand qualitatively where the future, where we were heading towards, the possibility of computer revolution, whether people would buy into the idea, and therefore you could have come up with a value. The only problem is the value you would have come up with, a great percentage of that value would or could have been speculative. There's nothing wrong with that. It would have been neither immoral, it wouldn't have been unethical, it wouldn't have been wrong. However, from an investment's perspective, you would have had to recognize and accept that a portion of what you were trying to do was speculative, and a portion of what you were trying to do was investing. In other words, I'd like you to see both as two sides of the same coin. There are times when you should focus on investing. There are times when you should look to the other side of the coin to understand, is this speculation? My view is always simple. Learn to stand on the edge of the coin. Every coin has three sides. You have the heads, you have the tail, and then you have the edge. Your ability to stand on the edge is very critical. The best opportunities, and in many cases, the best returns are generated sometimes from novel ideas that always begin somewhat speculative. And if you start and if you approach those opportunities with the understanding that I'm speculating now, I'm aware of it, I've limited the amount I will be investing, therefore my downside is known, I have identified the risks, I have clarified myself on what the uncertainties are, and all things considered, I recognize that number one, although I may have done my thorough analysis, the capital that I've kept, I do not have a guarantee of the safety of the principal. And number two, I may not get a return. Once you satisfy that criteria, then you're happy, you can proceed. But recognize something, there is a difference between speculating and investing.